Welcome to another edition of Safeware's product presentation. I'm Patrick Crawford with Safeware, and I have the pleasure of Michael Buffum from RTR Training and Equipment joining me today. And we're going to be talking about a couple of public access kits that we've developed for trauma, response, and first aid. And then we also will be discussing Michael's company, RTR Training and Equipment, and he actually provides training to folks that need trauma training in the workplace.
So RTR really stands for Race the Reaper training. So one thing that I come up with is that the hands of the first provider that applies the first dressings, that's where survivability comes in. That was told by Dr. Sen out from the military, and that we need to get the hands of these products into people, everybody, civilians, law enforcement, first responders, paramedics, firemen, everybody. My own personal background, I've been a paramedic for almost 18 years. I currently also work with a tactical team as well, so understanding the law enforcement aspects of this as well, how time is of the essence. Whether you're bleeding, whether it's a tactical type situation, we know what we see in the world today. There's a lot of situations that do present themselves where time is of the essence. Not only to get law enforcement there, but to get whatever threat that is done and dealt with, but then right around to turn around and start treating those injured people. That we don't necessarily all have the time to wait for fire and EMS to get there or law enforcement to get there, that maybe there's something that we can do when it's safe to help start saving people.
So we have some kits that we've put together for trauma care, but I want to just back up a little bit because this month is our the first Stop the Bleed campaign that's national. So for those folks that aren't familiar with Stop the Bleed campaign, could you tell us a little bit about that?
Correct. So after 2012 incident at Sandy Hook, obviously it was a kind of a call to action that we need to do something as just general public, as just everybody. We have to be prepared for these issues. So what happened was law enforcement, first responders, surgeons, everybody got together and they developed what was called the Hartford Consensus. What they pulled out from it was that people needed to be able to focus on the top three things in trauma that kill people, which is stopping the bleeding, opening the airway, and dealing with respirations. The basis and foundation from everything from tactical combat casualty care, T.E.A.C.H, tactical emergency casualty care, T.E.A.C.H, all these training events and things that are out there for law enforcement and first responders now has to get into the civilian hands, because we have to stop that bleeding or stop these preventable causes of death from minimally bleeding to death, because you can die from bleeding between 2 and 4 minutes, as quick as that.
So most of the people that go through trauma training, would you say that they're police officers and firefighters or paramedics, and those are the guys that get basic training all the time, right?
Absolutely. So from your basic law enforcement background academy, they get some type of first responder type information to help with this. Obviously, firemen and paramedics and EMT basics, they're going to get that medical background knowledge a little bit more than that. Now's the time, just like they've pushed out CPR for everybody, even just the hands-only CPR. Everybody should learn that. They're teaching it in high school to kids, for seniors, for them to get out of high school. So this is something as that basic concept of understanding what's going to kill that person first and being able to turn around and make a difference. And it's not just from active shooter type events. It's from any traumatic incident that occurred, a car accident, a lawnmower accident, and the list goes on and on and on. It's one of the top things that people die in this nation is from some type of trauma.
And I know that it's very sensitive right now with the school systems and everything that's going on, but to your point, there is much more trauma also taking place outside of our schools. Public access, where someone could be on a rail system, they could be driving a car, they get in an accident, to your point, and we need to provide them with some sort of trauma care.
Correct. So
Okay.
with that, what have we seen nationally build up? We have public access AEDs, automated external defibrillators, right? We have and teach people CPR so they can start doing something before first responders, law enforcement, or fire EMS get there. And that's everything. If we have public access bleeding control kits that are out there, maybe mounted with the AEDs and such, now people are going to automatically recognize where they can go to get these pieces of equipment to help stop the bleeding, potentially save somebody.
And so, unlike an AED that now they're pretty much automated,
Mm-hmm.
if you pull it off the shelf, it has a recording, says
Yeah.
do this, do this, do this. We don't really have that with trauma first aid. We don't really have a little video recorder inside of our trauma
correct.
box that
Correct.
tells us here's what you need to do.
And I'm pretty sure in the future we will see products come up that'll tell you step by step what to do. One of the reasons I think that is the way AEDs are is because what happens under stress? Our heart rate increases, our respiratory rate increases, our fine motor skills begin to disintegrate. If somebody's walking us through those steps, it's easier to do that as we hear it. It's much like the Stop the Bleed campaign with putting on tourniquets, with understanding direct pressure on a wound and even doing wound packing. That's a big step that somebody is going to, civilian base, going to have to go outside their norm and do something to prevent a death to occur. Probably to a loved one, could be a mother, father, child, or maybe somebody they don't even know.
So the more information we can push out on this, the more kits we can get out, and certainly the training side to show them how to deploy this equipment could potentially save lives.
Absolutely. So that's one great thing with the Stop the Bleed campaign. It's a national thing. The information is free on their website, bleedingcontrol.org. You can download all of this stuff and really get a true understanding of what they need to do to put a tourniquet on, just as simply as that.
So, Michael, one thing that really is out there now is everybody's using the term active shooter, meaning someone has a gun and they're shooting somebody. But what I'd like to know is when we're talking about trauma care, and you brought this up earlier, that there could be multiple situations where we can give trauma first aid. I want to just back up from the active shooter and talk about maybe active assailants or active aggressors, because there's been many other situations that just not somebody with a gun has created a trauma.
Yeah.
And you being a firefighter, paramedic, and working with SWAT teams, have you seen any situations come up that aren't the active shooter side?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, any call or dispatch on a call, we don't really know what we're going to get into till we get there. It could be a simple accident that could turn into a mass casualty scene. Could be kids, could be adults, it doesn't matter. There's been several incidents even before we had a lot of this commercial tourniquets and things like that. We would do the direct pressure. We would hold stabilization on it until we got to the hospital and then just pass it off to the trauma surgeon. Now that we have these commercial type devices that are designed to stop the bleeding, and especially in an extremity, we can quickly put one on and just continue to monitor them all the way to the hospital. So it kind of frees some hands, if you will, to be able to work on some other life-saving ventures for that paramedic that may need to do. From the county that I work in, we're very, very busy. It's been even as much as a tractor that rolled over on a female farmer and had a big gash in her leg that we used a tourniquet for several years ago. So it was the older style, up to the new ones now where just any motor vehicle accident that it can occur, they're going to quickly pull one out and deploy it and put it on to stop the bleeding, to control it. From gunshot wounds to stabbings to accidents on a playground to motor vehicle accidents, any of those things. You just don't know when this type of traumatic event might occur.
Perfect. So, Michael, thank you for your time to talk about Stop the Bleed Day. That'll be March 31st.
Correct.
So everybody needs to be aware of that day, and look for some more information following this video that we'll have for you with Michael's direct contact information. We'll add on some Stop the Bleed campaign information, and hopefully everybody takes advantage of what we have out there. Hello and welcome, Michael Buffum from RTR Training and Equipment. And Michael, thanks for working with me on these kits. Michael and I have actually developed a couple of kits here that we think are going to really do well for response to trauma out in the workplace. And we want to talk about a couple of these kits that we've put together. And then we want to talk about the products in these kits and how you would actually use the products. So, Michael, we were talking about some of the kits that we put together here, and what I'd like you to do is go through each of the components and then deploy them. And you can use my arm if you'd like, but let's go through. We've got a couple different styles of items here, and I think it's good that you talk about them, and that kind of lets the folks see what's included in our kit.
Okay, excellent. So the first thing we definitely want to start with is the bleeding control aspect of it, especially on an extremity. So what we have here is two different kinds of commercial devices that can control hemorrhage from an extremity. We do have the SOF-T, Special Operation Forces Tourniquet Wide, and then we also have the SWAT-T, which is the Special Weapons and Tactics Tourniquet, stretch, wrap, and tuck, as it's commonly referred to, how you utilize it.
So we have two tourniquets here, Michael. This one is which one?
This is the Special Operation Forces Tourniquet Wide, or SOF-T Wide. You can see it has a wide strap here. It has definitely a hard device for the windlass, as well as a locking feature and a quick release buckle, which is new to this style, where you can, if you need to take it off rapidly and redeploy it somewhere else, it has the capabilities to do that. Typically, an emergency type setting, when I don't have time to cut off your clothes and see exactly where all the wounds and injuries you're bleeding from, I can go high and tight with this, lock it down, and stop all the bleeding. From there, when I get to a point where I can maybe focus a little bit more on where the bleeding and injuries are, say if they're more down closer to the forearm, I can still go 2 to 3 inches above that injury and redeploy this down. I would always put a second one on first before you let that one go, especially if you have that major hemorrhage.
And how does this one go on?
So you would go up and around. You would take the locking feature here, lock it on, pull the tension, pull it nice and tight. Ultimately, what we were looking for, if Pat had a wound here and it was massively hemorrhaging, we want to go to the point where the bleeding has stopped. And then I'm going to, at that point, then begin to rotate the windlass. Once I get it to the point that, again, that bleeding has stopped, I'm going to use the triangle locking mechanism and lock it into place here. Now, it's completely secured and the bleeding has stopped. So I know this tourniquet is effective.
Perfect. Okay.
All right.
And this again is the
SOF-T Wide.
SOF-T Wide.
Yes, correct.
Okay.
And then again, as we talked
now,
about,
is this something you could self-deploy as well?
Absolutely. So in definitely any training anybody does, like a Stop the Bleed program or things, you should deploy it on yourself. To the point where even I make my students take their dominant hand, make a fist like something happened to their arm, and now they have to take their non-dominant hand and put this on themselves, just so they get in the habit of understanding, one, I can do it with my non-dominant hand, and I can put it over here and still stop.
And you'll go through that in your training
correct,
as well.
step by step, to make sure they're completely comfortable.
And that's our SOF-T Wide.
That's your SOF-T Wide. Correct.
And then you said there's another one in here called a SWAT-T.
Correct. This is the Special Weapons and Tactics one, and you'll see some of the differences is that I do not have a windlass, which will make the true locking feature down. And you can also see it comes in a variety of colors. This one specifically is orange.
Just looks like a big rubber band.
Pretty much. And if you think about the pressure that's needed to occlude the bleeding, to really squeeze down, that's our goal, is to stop that bleeding. With regular commercial tourniquets, majority of the ones out there, you can only get it as tight as the smallest that it goes. So if you have an elderly with a very small arm, or even a child, sometimes they're not as effective. Hence, maybe some applications like the SWAT-T can work a little bit more beneficial. And just as has the directions on there as well, you're going to stretch it, wrap it, and tuck it. It gives you some pictures to know that you're pulling it as tight as it can possibly go. But I'm going to put it on, I'm going to stretch, and now I'm going to wrap. And you want to definitely try to keep it as wide as possible to get the good not to make it as tight and thin, but a good wide base. So if I stretch and I wrap, you can see how big and long it is, right?
Yep.
So stretch.
And I can feel that start to cut off circulation.
Exactly.
Just like a big rubber band.
Yep, exactly. And the more you do it, stretch, wrap,
okay,
and you continue to go all the way until the very end, when you have enough pressure on there to control the bleeding, and you can just finish by tucking that in.
And you're ready to go.
Because of the elasticity, it's going to hold it in place.
Okay.
Okay. I've seen it work very well with children and some of the elderly that have smaller arms or smaller limbs, and it still has that compression factor on it to slow down, if not completely stop that bleeding.
So one thing I've heard especially when I was younger, the Boy Scouts and in the military, is that once you apply a tourniquet, you don't take it off and you don't move it. What about What about those things? If I apply a tourniquet, can I just take it off and reposition it or move it around?
Yeah,
or?
the best thing would be to wait for a medical trained personnel to evaluate it. One rule of thumb, though, is that if you think you need it, put it on.
So that's the two types of tourniquets are included in this kit. And let's look at some other products that we would have in here. So what do we have here?
So the other part of bleeding control, because that's the one thing that's really going to kill you the quickest when it concerns trauma, is that we have to control that bleeding. So if I have other areas like the neck or things like that, or even if you have a gaping open wound here, I need to do some kind of wound pack on it. Whether I can get into where it's bleeding and stop it by using regular gauze or even a hemostatic agent to pack that in nice and tight. Now I hold pressure on it if it's regular gauze for 3 to 5 minutes, right? So you're going to deploy this. They're nicely vacuum sealed, airtight, and this is actually 4 yards of gauze.
Oh wow! So that's quite a bit of gauze in there.
It is a lot, and I like the fact that it's still, because it's vacuum sealed like that, it kind of stays instead of a roll that just rolls everywhere.
Okay.
If you have a wound here in the neck, in the inguinal area, now I can easily deploy it, start packing that wound in nice and tight, keeping constant pressure on it. You definitely want to
So you want to get as much as you can in there, right?
Absolutely. Pack this in nice and tight. Once you get to the point where it's coming out of that wound and I cannot pack it any tighter, hopefully I have control of that vessel or vessels that are bleeding. Bunch up the rest on top, and this is where you're going to sit and hold for that 3 to 5 minutes if it's regular gauze. Different pieces of equipment calls for different amounts of time that you hold, but for regular gauze it would be 3 to 5 minutes. Once that's done, if I let go, what happens to the pressure? It
comes
goes
out.
So
right.
I have to have something to wrap on this to keep this tight. Now whether I switch to my SWAT T and use that, or H&H also makes another product called the H.
And these are all in this kit.
These are all in this kit, correct. So with the H&H, they have what's called an H dressing. They have a trauma pad on there. They have more elasticity. And how this works is you go directly over top of where you did that wound pack with the H. I can come around and you can see there's a little Velcro end here. If it works, great. You can just grab a hold of that ACE wrap. I come to, if you turn it that way, I come to that first part of that H. And I basically make a little U around it. I hold on to that H and I need to pull it tight. Did you feel it get tight?
I did, yeah.
Now, even if I let go, did it still feel tight?
Still feels tight.
Absolutely. So now I can come around to the other side. I can wrap around there again, hold on, finish pulling it tight.
Now that's a little tighter.
Yeah. So now from there, I come back the original way that I went. And all I do is just wrap this up, protecting that H device because I don't want it to catch on anything and potentially come off of where I did that wound pack. Towards the end, you have a larger Velcro that just kind of adheres to itself.
Okay.
And finally, an alligator clip on both sides where I can truly secure it in place. And now it's completely sealed up, covered up, and I have that bleeding controlled.
That's perfect. And then if you had other victims or now you're on standby, you're just watching this.
Correct.
Till aid comes for that 3 to 5 minutes.
So I can let go of him and go work on somebody next.
Gotcha. So a couple other things in here. We have, this is called a wound seal. Tell me about the wound seal.
So the wound seal itself, we have to have something for basically the belly button all the way up to the shoulders, front and back. Because if you think about it, for a wound pack and I start shoving something in your belly, how much can I put in? I can put a whole lot in. Right. So it doesn't work as effective. The main thing we want to worry about, the box as we call it, is the lungs. If there's some type of penetrating trauma that occurs to your chest, even your abdomen, it can still reach up to your lungs. If there's other air that's coming in, basically your lung is getting shrink down because of that other air.
Okay.
Ultimately, what you'll develop is what's terminology-wise is called a pneumothorax. It's going to lead to major respiratory depression and can even lead to death. So a wound seal is what we want to do. So we're going to pop that open. We're going to open this up. You have a small piece of gauze where I can wipe off some of the blood if that's what's going on.
Okay.
Open this up. tear this piece off, and it's nice and sticky.
Oh, yeah.
Really,
okay.
really
Yep,
sticky.
Really sticky.
And that's because if you think about if they're bleeding, if they're sweaty or cold or things like that, it may not stick as well. That's why the adherent pad's on here. From there, I'm just going to cover over top of that wound where it is.
Okay.
That is going to stop any air penetrating into the air area of your lungs and hopefully prevent that pneumothorax.
It's going to
from
seal me
occurring.
up there.
Correct. Yes.
And there's 2 of them in here?
There's 2 in each one.
Okay.
Correct.
So you talked about the back as well?
Yes. So if you think about it, even still, if it's from your belly button to your shoulders, front and back, even if something gets hit from your back, can I still get to your lungs? Absolutely. So you have a little bit more meat and bones and stuff in the way, but still, you still want to cover that up. 1, to recognize where the wound is, and 2, to prevent any additional air coming potentially into your airway.
That's perfect. And we also have another, this is a sterile burn blanket.
Yeah, so this is a regular sterile burn blanket. And when we open this up, these have been around for quite some time. If you think about, they call it a sterile burn blanket. If you have a burn injury, I can wrap this up, that injury in it, to protect it from infection, because now it's open to the air and things like that.
Got it.
In addition, though, when you have a traumatic event and you have bled out quite a bit, one of the other things that's going to happen to your body, if you think about what blood does, what is one of the things blood does? It helps regulate
Your body
the
temperature,
right? So if you've lost a lot of blood, then you're going to be cold. So one thing that they do teach is that we need to keep them warm. So a sterile burn blanket, if you can wrap them up in this, it potentially can help to keep you warm enough to
foil,
get you to
almost
the
like a foil.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Perfect.
Okay.
All right. No, that's great. So these are the items that will come inside of this kit here. And what we'll do is talk about another trauma kit in a few minutes. But you can gather all the information you need on this trauma kit on Safeware's website at www.safewareinc.com.
So the original concept behind this is to be able to have in a sense, a concealed way to have multiple deployable medical aids in case there is some type of major trauma that does occur. Maybe an active assailant type injury, maybe some type of mass casualty situation of any kind. Could be from a construction accident, could be even from a motor vehicle accident or several vehicles involved. But ideally, if you are in a home base or a main office or something like that, you're kind of at the front of all this. With these deployable kits, you can quickly sling this on when it's safe, depending on the threat, depending on the situation, and then it has 5 kits based on the MARCH acronym that goes along with Tactical Combat Casualty Care, Tactical Emergency Casualty Care, that deals with massive bleeding, with airway stuff, with respirations. So you can either deploy them and just drop them off so that other people can open them and start to use them to control the bleeding, to open the airway and things of that nature, or you can stay with them and start opening them and deploying them if you are in a safe location and maybe barricaded inside where you do have injured where you are.
So I know that there's been a huge push over the last couple of years to get trauma kits out into this workplace for what we're going to call for the open market. Is there any terminology or anything that we would use when we're talking about these kind of kits going out? So we're talking about just trauma here?
Correct. So this isn't like your regular Band-Aid box, if you will.
So we're talking about a public access trauma kit.
Correct, yeah. So this isn't something you need a degree on or certifications or anything else like that. But having a good basic knowledge like the Stop the Bleed campaign or other trauma courses will point you in the right direction. It's not about intubating somebody. It's not about cutting somebody open or doing surgery stuff. This is about basic wound management, ultimately. We are keeping the blood inside the body. We're allowing the breathing machine to continue on by making an occlusive dressing over maybe a penetrating trauma on the chest or abdomen or even the back.
Fantastic. So this is one kit that would have multiple kits inside of a sling pack that we could just take and drop these by a victim.
Correct.
Okay, and then people can start rendering some trauma aid to them. And then another kit that we have is one that goes right inside of this box that we can store. And tell me about these products that come in the box here.
So the original concept behind the box, a young elementary school girl came up to me with her mother and were asking to build some type of trauma kit. When asking her a little bit more about it, she did, rather than just a Band-Aid box, which is what she was thinking, there was some renditions of the old Columbine shooting that was a reenactment done that was showed at a friend of her school's that really freaked her friend out. So she wanted and had the forethought to be able to push forward to be able to have something for all the teachers and have something for all the students in case something like that occurred again. So that's kind of the concept behind the T.E.A.C.H kits, which is the Teacher Emergency Action Care Help Kits. But what it is, it still focuses on definitely bleeding control. That's your number one causer of fatality.
So the main goal is with Stop the Bleed and these kits, first thing, stop the bleed.
Correct. So particularly as it gets into the program and stuff, you're thinking about an extremity. Really, you're going to try to use a tourniquet on those. When you get into some other areas, maybe of the neck, of the inguinal area, things like that, you have to actually pack it. You have to get pressure on it, direct pressure. If you have multiple victims, you can't just hold pressure on one person. You're going to have to go and help other people. So they teach you how to do a true wound pack and secure it down, whether with pressure dressings. We don't have hemostatics in this one, but regular gauze you can use, or whatever you can shove into that hole to get a nice
pack that
pressure, pack it nice and tight to stop and control the bleeding. Also to the point where basically from the belly button to the shoulder, front and back, you want to use some type of wound seal on that. So that way, ultimately what you're trying to do is prevent additional air going in and trapping in the lungs, which can lead to what's called a pneumothorax, and that would lead to significant respiratory distress and even death. We can't per se worry about internal bleeding. That's going to be a surgical thing. They've still have got to get to definitive care. But if this is in the hands of the civilians and they've been trained how to do it, simple maneuvers, simple things to put on, by the time that law enforcement officer gets there, the first responders,
we're given
EMS
that much more time.
Correct. They have that much greater a chance of survival because you're getting something on there and controlling it as quick as possible.
Perfect. So this would be one that we could put into public access, into an office building, maybe a workplace area, a schoolroom.
Yep, schools,
and for the teacher,
religious organizations, different things where you have kind of a mass of crowds that you're going to have. You need some type of resource there.
And this kit would be able to do 1 to 2 people. It looks like very quickly, maybe more, depending on what the situation is.
Depends on the injuries and how
Sure.
many people that you do have.
There could be a work site where somebody takes a saw and cuts themselves.
Correct.
We're not talking about, a shooter or someone with a knife, but somebody accidentally cuts themselves.
Absolutely.
So we're able to get that first aid and stop that bleeding as soon as possible. Wanted to show you another kit that we actually developed here. Michael and I came up with this kit as a bulk sling deployment trauma kit, if you will. It actually contains 5 trauma kits inside, and these are easily stored. These individual kits are easily stored inside of this sling bag. And what this will allow someone to do is actually have this kit at a main office or in a building somewhere where they can actually take and pick this up very quickly on the fly and run to wherever they need to render first aid and trauma care to patients. And if they have multiple victims or they need to deploy multiple kits, they'll actually have those kits available that they can just pull out and quickly throw down by a victim and move on, and then let someone render the trauma and first aid to the victim, or they could stop if they have the time to do that themselves. So Michael, what I'd like to do is go through this kit, if we can, of what's in here. So we have 5 of these individual kits inside of the sling pack, and let's go through our contents of our trauma kit.
Absolutely. So if you think about it, being able to self-treat is obviously important. If a traumatic event happened and you couldn't get the definitive help from fire EMS or things like that, you need to be able to work on yourself in a sense, or others that can help you with the injury, the traumatic injury that does occur.
In this kit, we have 5 items. Michael, and what are they inside of this kit?
So real quick, we have two style tourniquets, which is we have a Special Operation Forces tourniquet, a soft T wide. We have a Special Weapons and Tactics tourniquet, a SWAT T, commonly referred to. We have a H&H medical chest seal, and we also have a thin H bandage, and as well as 4 yards of compressed gauze, just regular gauze.
So first on the tourniquets, let's go through this one. This one is
Okay.
our soft T wide,
Correct?
and I have one right here that's out of the packaging.
Correct. So your soft T wide, any really good true tourniquet's going to be 1.5 inches wide. It's going to have a windlass type device, which this one does. So when you deploy this one, it also has a new feature, which is the buckle on here that I can lock on quickly, or if I need to change location of that where I initially put it, I can easily undo that and then relock it back in, and then of course turn my windlass to finish tightening it up, controlling the bleeding.
So if I have some problem here on my arm and you need to
Correct.
put a tourniquet on.
Correct. So whether you keep it already locked and slide through, or maybe it's a lower extremity and I have to think about, I got to go around that arm or leg. Now I can come around and the device will lock in. Then I want to pull the band as tight as I possibly can. Once it is as tight as I can, now I can go to my windlass. I can rotate my windlass to the point where now I'm looking and making sure that the bleeding is controlled and has stopped. Once I'm that point, I'm locked down real tight, I can use the triangle locking device and hold that windlass in place so that I know that I've stopped the bleeding. From there, I can just finish wrapping this around and tucking it away. And now I can move on to another victim.
Pack in the wound maybe if you needed to, or
Correct.
something like that.
Yeah,
or
that
like you said, we're going to move on to the next
Correct. Injury, whatever
victim or
it is.
injury.
Correct.
Okay.
So that's your soft T wide.
All right.
The second style of tourniquet in here is the Special Weapons and Tactics tourniquet. This one that does not have a windlass device to lock it down, but many times you also are dealing potentially with children, with maybe the elderly, or even just thin people in general. But it will allow a lot of pressure to be wrapped around to evidently slow or stop that bleeding.
So this is just like a big rubber band, but it also, I can see on there where it has some tourniquet information on it,
Yep.
and kind of shows you how to deploy it, which way, and wrap it up.
Exactly. So if you look at the way that it's designed, stretch, wrap, and tuck, you have two pictures here. And as you stretch and pull, you will see the pictures change, and that's what ultimately what you're trying to do to make sure you have enough tension on it. But if I do have an injury that I can put this on, this is one that probably going to need some help to put on, but I'm going to put it on, stretch, and wrap.
Stretch and wrap, just
Stretch
like
and
it
wrap.
says.
Yep. And then I'm going to stretch and wrap some more. Now you should start feeling the
I do.
band
Yep.
holding
Feel that.
compression on there, and ultimately occluding those arteries and veins is what our goal is, because I want to be able to try and stop the bleeding.
Gotcha.
Now once I get to the point where all bleeding is controlled, now I can go to the point where I'm going to tuck it. So all you're going to do is come around, and it's going to hold. You have to go around enough times that now I can just kind of get the band and tuck it
And
in
holds
where
it
is.
right in place.
And it's just going to stay in place. Controlling that bleeding is our ultimate goal.
Gotcha. Okay, so that's the two types of tourniquets that are in those packs.
Correct. But you also might have injuries, maybe of the neck, of the inguinal area, where I can't put it. I'm not going to put a tourniquet around your neck. So I have to have something to be able to pack it. So that's where your regular gauze is going to come in. Your thin H is going to come in for this. And maybe we can also, I'll show you how to use the SWAT T almost as a pressure bandage as well. So I would open up the H bandage. This is 4 yards of gauze in this. Basically vacuum sealed, so when you pull it out, it looks like this, nice and tightly wrapped. But if he's got an injury, maybe of the neck, inguinal, or somewhere else, maybe I ran out of tourniquets, but I have to have direct pressure on this injury, now I have to do a wound pack. So your Stop the Bleed campaign, things like that, T.E.A.C.H, T.E.A.C.H teaches you how to do these things. But where this injury is, I can now start having direct pressure over top of those vessels that are bleeding, packing that injury site with as much gauze as I can. So that way it'll have it nice and tight in there to hold pressure against those arteries and veins to stop and control the bleeding. Once it's to the point where I can't put any more in that and I have a little bunch here, I'm just going to go automatically automatically right on top. And now I'm going to hold down pressure for 3 to 5 minutes with regular gauze, and then depending on the type of either hemostatic agent or whatever you're using, it will recommend the time frame. For regular gauze, it is already known as 3 to 5 minutes.
Okay.
Once I know that bleeding is controlled, now if there was other injured victims, if I let go, that pressure is gone.
Gotcha.
I want to be able to keep it.
We want to keep that pressure on.
So that's where your H emergency bandage comes into play. This is the H bandage. It's a pressure bandage. So
and this pressure bandage, talking about an H, it actually has a small little plastic H on there.
Correct. And that's your mechanical advantage device. So for that injury itself.
So I've got this on.
And I've held that. And now that H goes right over top of that wound pack that we did. You can see it does have a trauma pad on it as well in case there's any other additional bleeding. If there's too much bleeding, we have to redo it because we didn't control the bleeding. And that's the whole
We didn't maybe pack enough in there.
Correct.
We got to shove it in there as much as
I'm not going to
in.
just keep putting trauma pad over trauma pad over trauma pad. I've got to get to where the injured vessels are. With this, it does have a small Velcro piece that it can hook to the ACE wrap, if you will. And I come to the first side. I come to my first bar on the H. I make a little loop. I can hold that and pull it tight. And you feel it get tight.
Start feeling a little bit of pressure.
Absolutely. Even if I let go, it's still holding some pressure. Now I'm going to come to the other side. And I'm going to go around the other part of the H. Hold the H. Pull tight again. It should be nice and tight now, right?
It is.
So now that's the mechanical advantage of the H device itself. From here, now I'm going to finish wrapping this up. Once I get towards the end of the wrap, there's a larger Velcro that will just adhere to itself. It kind of makes it nice and convenient. Followed by, at the very end, there's like an alligator clip here to finally secure it in position.
Okay.
And that will not let go because of the way
it's so now it's all on there, putting pressure. And now you can go focus on other people or the responders that come and help after you. They'll know to be able to see that and say, "Hey, look, I've got a wound here that we had to deal with."
Yep. And if I didn't have the H, maybe I used it on a patient already, but I didn't use the SWAT T, I can actually do the same thing with the SWAT T, and this pressure will hold that wound pack nice and tight down.
Okay,
well.
And you can keep. Once I've packed it, I think I got it, I can put more on there.
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
So now the way this is all covered up, you don't really see anything sticking out.
Right.
You can even see the pressure on your hands, right? So we know that we're being effective, and the fact it's not bleeding through, which is the
perfect.
key.
Okay.
So from here, that takes care of our bleeding for junctional type injuries like the neck or the inguinal.
So everything we've been talking about, our first thing is stop the bleeding.
Correct.
Right? Stop the bleeding. And again, this month, March 31st, is the first annual Stop the Bleed campaign.
National Stop the Bleed Day.
National Stop the Bleed Day. And we want to make sure we're focusing on that. And then we have one more product.
Yep, one more product here. It's basically a wound seal here, hydrogel dressing. And when we talk about specifically the box, which is basically the belly up to the shoulders, front and back, what we want to try to protect is the lungs and the breathing. So I can't put a whole bunch of gauze in your chest, right? That's going to be counterproductive. It's not going to work. But if I can cover over top of that, not allowing air in.
Try to seal up my...
Seal it up. Correct. You're going to
seal
the box.
Right. You're going to seal the box.
By not allowing air in there, your lung will not start to be pushed by that extra air. It can't expand and contract. So it causing what's called a pneumothorax. And that will lead to respiratory depression, and that will lead to respiratory arrest.
So once I open this package up, here's what I have.
So very, very sticky, clear plastic. And when you think about if somebody's
very sticky
bleeding or sweating, you need something that's going to really grab a hold and not worry about slipping off. But I would peel this off and I would stick this right over top of that penetrating injury wherever it occurred. And that will protect additional air that we don't want in there to keep it out.
Perfect. So, folks, what we have here is we have a bulk trauma pack, sling pack that you can actually have to take out and have at your facility. But we also have RTR training and equipment, and Michael can come out and also do your training as well. At the end of this video, you'll be able to see all of his company information. You'll be able to reach out to him personally, or give us a call here at Safeware, 301-683-1234. or see us on the web at www.safewareinc.com. Michael, tell me about RTR's training and what you do in the field to help people deploy this.
Okay, so basically, my company is really mostly focused on a training company. We definitely do CPR, something every single person, child, everybody should know. I also do a Stop the Bleed courses as well. So I'll come into schools, I'll come into religious establishments, businesses, even just individual residential groups, and go in and teach a Stop the Bleed class, whether it's with the family, the adults, the kids, everybody, anybody. They all can understand and learn how to do Stop the Bleed. In addition, I also do Narcan training as well, specifically more for kind of goes into law enforcement, but as well anybody can generally understand and even get the kits too, because it is another epidemic that's worldwide and definitely here in the United States, if not Maryland specific.
Well, it's definitely important to have this equipment, but it's also important to have the training side. So that's great that you can offer that. So what we'd like to do is make sure that folks, you'll see Michael's information at the tail end of this video for RTR training and equipment. We encourage you to reach out to him if you have any questions. He is and does have the ability to train nationally for groups of folks. And again, whether you're in a religious area or you're in a school system, or we're talking about public access to come to your business, we can actually provide that training with Michael, and we can provide the trauma kits and first aid kits as well. So I'd encourage you to reach out to us here at Safeware. You can look us up on the web at www.safewareinc.com, or give us a call at 301-683-1234, and we'll get somebody to help you out.